Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay and for the technical problem. We have together with Dol Hyman today, and we will discuss about the offsets and the military perspective of the offsets. As you all know, the weapons contractors, like other profit-making or corporations, are not particularly interested in the general economic development of the countries in which they operate or to which they sell. They are not inherently antagonistic to encouraging economic development, but their primary interest and the motivation is in selling their products and making money. That's why they are in the business to do. Consequently, from the weapons contractors' point of view, the cost offsets are a marketing tool, a way of building enthusiasm or overcoming the resistance to buying their products. Whether offsets encourage development or not is quite beside the point. And from the point of the weapons purchasing countries, there are a number of possible motives for demanding cost offsets as a condition of purchase. They might consider offsets as a straightforward means of raising the benefit and the cost ratio of their weapons purchases by lowering net costs, providing additional economic effects, or both. Alternatively, the governments could believe that the offsets will give them a political cover for what amounts to providing hidden subsidies to indigenous military. So before we begin with Dol to our fireside chat, I thought that it will be fun to give a short history of your professional career and the various adventures that brought you into the crazy field of offsets, and how you ultimately came to play a leadership role in helping guide the industrial partnership community over the past 30 years. Although anyone who knows you knows that you have an impressive track record of structuring and implementing creative partnerships for both large industrial groups as well as senior government ministries that oversee and manage their respective countries' industrial partnership programs. You have provided advisory services for many of the largest aerospace and defense companies, and you have also been brought in as an advisor, speaker, and subject matter expert to many ministries in Asia, Africa, South America, and many countries. I know that you have played an integral leadership role for some 25 years at GOCA, the Global Offset and Counter Trade Association, which is now called GICA, where you helped lead and guide GOCA to become the leading and the largest global gathering of both industry and the government leaders in the industrial partnership and the offset arena. You have realized the importance of inviting and including government offset authorities to your meetings in the room, as you believe that the government offset leaders were the most important people, because with the government participation and the support, the GOCA gatherings became much more valuable for all the participants. Your educational background was that you received your Bachelor of Arts in English and American Literature from Brandeis University, and then you earned your Master of Business Administration from New York University, majoring in marketing and international business. So my first request is for you to tell us how and where did you grow up, where did you start your career, and what path or paths brought you into the offset community. And when you were first starting out some 35 years ago, did you ever think about an offset career? How did it all begin?
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. Shafqat, first of all, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Because we had some technical challenges at first. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, the youngest of 3 children. My dad was a respected doctor and leader in the field of radiology. And my parents assumed and hoped that I would follow in my dad's footsteps and also become a doctor. I, of course, chose a much more fulfilling career than helping people live longer. Instead, I chose a career that would make the world a better place through the field of offsets. So, as you can see, I've made more than a few mistakes in my career path. Growing up, my parents would often welcome visitors into our home from all over the world. Many times they would be young doctors who had come to train at the famous Johns Hopkins Hospital. In time, I came to appreciate that my parents had given me and my siblings the gift of being comfortable with people from other cultures. And I also felt it was normal to have a network of friends and extended family, literally from all over the world. Although my father was a doctor, Many of my other close relatives were in businesses, food businesses, textile businesses, janitorial supplies, manufacturing, trading, and even exporting businesses. And from an early age, I worked for many of those businesses where I learned the importance of treating people with respect and trying to always make sure that all parties benefited from whatever project I was pursuing. This taught me the concept and importance of a win-win philosophy and has continued to be the primary driver in the way I try to approach problem solving. My first job out of business school was going to work for a brilliant businessman who was originally from Egypt, who owned a half a dozen companies in the textile waste, and used clothing businesses. Although most of his business activities were in the United States, my boss understood that there was an opportunity, a better opportunity to create businesses selling into emerging markets and initially focusing on the sub-Saharan African markets, specifically and primarily Nigeria. So as no one in his companies was willing to travel to Nigeria, he volunteered me to go and develop his Nigerian trading businesses. I was in my early 20s and looked at this opportunity as an adventure, as Nigeria was truly a frontier filled with unlimited trading, financing, and investment opportunities to do business. And within the next few years, I would travel to Nigeria close to 40 times, and my commercial activities grew from trading container loads of textiles to trading and financing shiploads of commodities, such as rice, flour, tobacco, oils. And then as my Nigerians wanted to expand their own activities from just trading, I was soon helping them set up turnkey manufacturing operations for soft drink industries, toilet paper manufacturing facilities, tomato paste canning facilities, candy businesses, manufacturing candy, and poultry operations. So while Nigeria was a very challenging business market, at the same time, it was a frontier filled with opportunity. And I was lucky enough to find smart and hardworking local Nigerian partners with whom to team and develop lifelong friendships. In fact, I was made an honorary Igbo chief, and our various business ventures made profits for both the company I worked for, as well as the many local Nigerian partners. But then in 1982, the price of oil dropped from $39 to $13 a barrel. And within 18 months, the Nigerian economy crashed, it collapsed. And it became very difficult to continue to facilitate trade and investment into Nigeria, as there were very limited hard currency availability. So as Nigeria had defaulted on their external debt, and very few overseas banks would confirm Nigerian letters of credit, trading and investment slowed down dramatically. So the Nigerian financial crisis showed me that although I could sell almost anything, I needed to enhance my financing skills. In other words, I wanted to learn to facilitate trade and investment into countries that had an abundance of natural resources, but very limited hard currency. So I left my first job and joined an international.
Though we cannot hear you. Though we cannot hear you. You're muted. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so where did you leave off? What did you hear about the financial crisis in Nigeria?
Yeah, you left the business and started a new business, new journey.
Okay, so I had joined this group, Merban, the merchant banking group, and I was trained in finance, trade, and investment opportunities in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and South America. Merban's leadership team were primarily former senior bankers from large US and European banking groups. The founder and chairman of Merban was a Frenchman who was one of the patriarchs and pioneers in the escrow trading clearing business between India and Russia, China and Russia and many of the countries in South America. And one of our main activities was to create the financing vehicles to allow trade flows to occur without the hard currency, but where there could be counter trade transactions that could in turn create structured finance opportunities. By chance, one of my first jobs at Merban was negotiating a counter trade services agreement between Merban's then parent, Continental Grain, and the Israeli Ministry of Trade and Economy. I learned a lot at Merban and created a global network of relationships with both captains of industry as well as government ministries dealing with trade, investment, and financing issues. 20 years ago, I left Merban, and with the backing of my original boss, who I'd remained in close touch with, I established Dolan International Trade and Capital that focuses on providing advisory services to companies and governments in the industrial partnership field.
I have a
That's
question.
a little intro.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you explained, you were trained as a commodity trader and a banker specializing in international trade finance. But how did that lead to offsets?
Well, it's a crazy path. Around 1985, China was opening up its markets for international trade and investment. And the Chinese had instituted a trade policy that required trade balancing for any big ticket item or capital equipment purchases that the Chinese would make. And at that time, China was developing various large power gen projects, the Three Gorges project, you may remember, resulting in billions of dollars of procurements, and companies like GE and Alstom and Ansaldo and Combustion Engineering. They were all pursuing large supply contracts, which would in turn all trigger trade balancing or counter purchase obligations. So our company was one of the leaders in structuring and implementing these Chinese trade balancing programs. And we were linking commodity exports from China to capital equipment imports into China to satisfy many of the Chinese counter purchase requirements. One of the companies I was working with as a buyer or off-taker of Chinese oil was Chevron. And one afternoon in 1987, I received a call from a senior vice president at Chevron who informed me that he was about to purchase $12 million of offshore oil well rig equipment from Hyundai in Korea. He asked me if I had any offsets I could link his purchase to. And my reply to him was naturally, what's an offset? And his answer to me was, it's similar to the China trade balancing you're doing, but it's primarily for aerospace and defense communities. And I, of course, said, no problem, I can do that. And so began my intro and adventures in offsets, industrial partnerships, and industrial cooperation. And 36 years later, I'm still involved in the industrial partnership industry, but the nature of the deliverables and the required solutions changed dramatically. The days of simple documentary trade balancing have diminished and have been replaced by a requirement for true and substantive investments and partnerships by and between obligors and beneficiary companies in the countries awarding large supply contracts.
So for those in our audience who are new to the field of offsets, can you provide a brief history as to how this offset industry developed and matured?
Well, different people may or will have different answers to that question. One plausible answer is that in 1933, the US government passed the first iteration of the Buy American Act. And the Buy American Act required that foreign companies that were trying to sell their products to the US government could only do so if the goods being sold were manufactured in the US, and at least 50% of the cost of the components must also come from the US. So if one scrolls forward another 90 years to 2023, almost every industrialized nation has now enacted what I would call a quid pro quo legislation. That legislation more often than not states that if a foreign company or supplier wants to do business in my country, as a condition precedent to being awarded a supply contract, the foreign company has to contractually agree to deliver technology and/or joint ventures and/or maintenance, repair, overhaul capabilities and/or increase exports and/or deliver a full basket of economic and social benefits to our nation. But I think of the original Buy American Act as the grandfather of today's offset activities. Others believe that the Chinese policy implemented in the early 80s, requiring joint ventures to allow business in China, became a model for other countries to follow. But the truth is, it doesn't matter who was first, but more importantly, that the industrial partnership industry continues to evolve and mature and hopefully improve.
I do have another question, though. What do you see as the realistic goals that nations want to achieve through their industrial partnership programs? And are those goals really met?
Well, the goals of every government official overseeing their country's industrial partnership programs are to develop mutually beneficial partnership relationships with those foreign companies who are either selling them products or projects, or with those foreign companies that are extracting their natural resources. Other goals are to create industrial partnership programs to deliver substantive and sustainable economic and social benefits to their country. And by substantive, we mean creation of new jobs, acquiring state-of-the-art technologies, and we also mean something that will stand and thrive on its own commercial merits. Furthermore, countries want to reduce dependence on their foreign suppliers, which means acquire and build the nation's human capability skill sets and technologies to build, maintain, repair, and improve products that they source from foreign suppliers. Sometimes our offset industry moves forward with tremendous success stories, but we've also seen examples where governments succeed in leveraging IP programs to build sustainable, commercially viable local industries that have helped them to make them first-tier world-class suppliers in a whole host of industries, and everyone's benefited. At other times, we've seen examples where our offset industry seems to move backwards because some government authorities have unrealistic expectations and/or demands requiring unsustainable or not commercially viable business models. At the same time, we've seen some industrial groups that have reaped impressive financial and technological rewards from the collaborations they've forged in partner countries. And at other times, we've seen some industrial groups who talk about what they'll deliver, but at the end of the day, adopt internal policies that discourage making substantive investments of capital and manpower resources that would be required to achieve success. Many nations have learned to leverage their IP programs more successfully as vehicles to create practical and successful industries in their countries. Look at both South Korea and Turkey, both of which are great examples of how offset programs have helped both of those nations become world-class manufacturers and developers of state-of-the-art technology in the fields of aerospace and defense. Successful offset programs are a result of successful true partnerships between industry and governments. And the industrial partnership programs that are most successful are those programs where countries have focused on creating environments and incentives where obligors can pursue attractive and profitable opportunities to doing business in the new market. Building these opportunities, though, takes hard work and funding and cooperation between various ministries in a given market. And it's no secret that in many countries, all of those ingredients are not always available. We've seen too many examples where ministries within a country not only do not cooperate, but sometimes actually sabotage one another on supporting offset programs. For example, we have on several occasions seen a Ministry of Defense block allowing any civil or commercial activity as an eligible vehicle for generating offset credits. simply because they did not want to share a slice of the economic benefit pie with other ministries. I once heard a minister of defense literally shout at another minister who was trying to secure a badly needed health-related deliverable that could have been funded by a large defense company in satisfaction of the offset obligation. The defense minister claimed the offset obligation was a result of a procurement made by his ministry, his budget, and therefore all economic benefits had to flow back to his ministry. The other minister more calmly replied that the MOD was funded by all the citizens of the nation, and it was only fair that the economic benefits be shared by various sectors in the country. I witnessed that argument over 20 years ago, and I can assure you that same argument is still going on in many countries around the world. In fact, I was recently engaged by one ministry to help them defend against attack from their own MOD. In these cases where there are territorial fights between ministries, it's important to have the support and trust of the senior leadership in the specific country. A country's senior leadership can sometimes intervene and broker a peace and/or direct that projects must move forward. So the secret to success in our industry is all about trust and relationships. Further to this point, building trust and relationships doesn't occur overnight. It takes years to build trust and close relationships, and those assets must be carefully treasured. What has always made no sense to me is when I see some large A&D company allow, and in some cases force, the very people in their organizations who invested years earning the respect and trust of the customer to be replaced with new inexperienced colleagues who may not understand or even respect the culture they're now working with. And as a result, those companies may find their project implementation delayed by years because the government customer is no longer trusting their industry counterpart. One lesson learned for government offset authorities is that countries greatly improve their chances of having a truly successful industrial partnership program when they recognize and implement a carrot instead of a stick approach. The stick approach is, if you don't deliver the offset benefits that we tell you to deliver, you're going to pay a penalty or you'll be banned from future business in our market, regardless of whether or not it makes sense, commercial sense, to pursue that specific venture in the market. But it's common sense to realize that if offset programs are not commercially viable and have little chance of making profits for their partners, they will more often than not fail, and it's unlikely that the support from the aerospace and defense company management will materialize. Alternatively, if there's an attractive carrot created for the obligor, that clearly demonstrates how there's a strategic justification for establishing a new venture in the target country, where the obligor will make more money in that country than in their own country. Then the obligor is much more likely to get the internal approval to approve establishing a new venture.
So what more specific advice would you give to the offset czars that want to improve the deliverables that result from their offset programs?
Well, I'll proceed with caution on giving advice to offset czars. I've done that before, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, as some of the people who are listening are well aware. But first, I would say we've learned that the ministry that oversees their nation's industrial partnership program, they have the job to assemble many pieces of a puzzle to pave the way for success. They have to have realistic asks and requests and demands that they want to be fulfilled by the obligor. As I said before, no one's going to dedicate resources to establish an operation in a new market unless they know that the product they'll be producing will have sufficient built-in customers to justify all the work and expense of establishing the venture. In other words, do you have credible answers for who's going to purchase or use the product that's to be produced? Another question is, what new ventures make the most commercial sense to pursue given the country's specific attributes and existing capabilities? Do they have a skilled workforce to manage the proposed project? Do most of the workers have to be imported? What incentives can the ministry or ministries within the country offer the obligors to build a long-term mutually beneficial relationship in the country? And in that thought, can other ministries be brought in to offer economic development support? The offset authority should also seek advice from experts outside their own ministry that can provide professional and unbiased guidance as to which projects make most sense, given that specific country's workforce, skill sets, engineering capabilities, access to and sources of raw materials, channels of distribution if and when they produce a product, and local financing support to help attract foreign investment. And often the outside expert is more likely to be respected and listened to by other ministries in the country. The idea is to change the mindset from my project to our project. As an example, let's say an aerospace and defense manufacturing and/or MRO project is being considered for Southeast Asia. It may make a lot more sense to develop a regional strategic plan and alliances and partnerships between countries in the region to determine which country will produce which products, instead of every country trying to produce every product. In other words, are there other countries in the region that could also become partners in the venture, where each party brings important assets to the table: funding, workforce, offtake customers? Another point is, can other ministries within a country deliver incentives to the obligor to make investments in the country? Bear in mind, if the A&D obligor will not be able to prove that the proposed venture makes commercial sense and will make profit for the obligor will probably not get their own internal approval to pursue the project. So there's got to be a way to allow and encourage aerospace and defense obligors to include subject matter experts who've proven experience in developing and financing the envisioned products and projects. So we've seen that for those countries that have found ways to attract inward or foreign investment into their country, perhaps through economic development programs or tax incentives or grant funding for R&D development, or soft loan facilities to encourage foreign investment, those countries have enjoyed enormous success in attracting foreign partners who want to forge long-term profitable investment opportunities. In other words, if a country finds a way to attract foreign investment because you'll make more money in my country than in your own country, it becomes easier for obligors to pursue those business opportunities. One of my close friends who was a senior officer in his company said, "Let me give my management something to eat that can be swallowed like honey, instead of giving them something to eat that's like trying to swallow barbed wire." So countries have to learn to prepare honey cocktails to support the offset partners to secure corporate approval. These honey-flavored cocktails can be achieved by coupling economic development programs with the industrial partnership programs. Some of the most effective offset programs have been in those countries where the offset authority was able to secure financing support from other ministries to attract serious support, investment, and participation from the obligor companies. So again, in other words, how would you sum it up? The messaging and opportunity that a government offset authority should want to communicate to the obligors could and should be, you guessed it, invest in our country and make more money than you would by investing in another market, or perhaps even your own country. And if you invest in our country, and we will provide you with financial and commercial incentives and support that will make that proposed venture commercially viable and highly profitable. Let everybody win. offset ministries need to understand that the obligor's offset representatives often have a harder time convincing their own internal management to pursue a venture than convincing the offset authority or the potential foreign local beneficiary partner to participate in whatever the venture is. The truth is that many large aerospace and defense companies make it very challenging to gain approval internally to pursue any new businesses in new markets with all of the associated risks and liabilities. So the offset teams have to get approval from many parties in their company, including but not limited to their internal finance teams, their mergers and acquisition teams, their lawyers, their global supply chain teams. And this is typically a very slow process because many of those internal teams at the obligor's company spend more time figuring out reasons why not to do a deal than figuring out reasons how to get a deal done. Offset ministries also need to understand that it may take years to get an aerospace company to get their global supply chain teams to agree to seriously look at new foreign suppliers. Global supply chain officers typically see the offset teams as annoying and disruptive counterparts who make their lives unnecessarily more difficult. And to be fair to the global supply chain teams, they believe that moving away from proven suppliers that they have domestically or that they have years of working with towards a new supplier in this new country where there happens to be this offset obligation is an activity filled with risk. Risk of product performance, delivery risk, risk of certification, risk of non-compliance on ITAR issues, and I'm sure many other risks not mentioned above that I haven't even thought of. And unless the global supply chain teams are directed by senior management to provide serious support, you can expect, more often than not, that the global supply chain teams will come up with a dozen reasons why they cannot or will not change their suppliers. So this means that the government offset authorities have to recognize this challenge, and they need to help the A&D offset teams to navigate the A&D company's internal challenges. And experience has taught us that winning this battle is rarely accomplished solely by the offset teams. Or if it is solely by the offset teams, it takes a long time. However, the chances are greatly improved if the business development teams that were part of the original supply contract campaign are also brought into the conversation to demand support not from the offset czar, but from their respective company's senior management. So another important suggestion for country offset authorities, make your offset guidelines actually guidelines and not law. Guidelines can be flexible and adapt to changing environments. In contrast, laws rarely have flexibility, and they can prevent reasonable and logical evolutions that may be required to enable projects to move forward.
So a question for you that, can you think of some examples of showcase and the successful offset programs that delivered great benefits to the parties involved?
Okay, so now we get to the fun part. Obviously, there are many showcase examples of successful offset programs. I don't pretend to be an expert on all of them, but to name a few programs and people in no particular order that stand out in my mind, I would say, first, I think of General Sugair, who led the Saudi IP program for many years. Having the vision to work with Lockheed to help create the Mohammed bin Salman College of Business and Entrepreneurship in partnership with Babson College, producing thousands of graduates who are enriching the Saudi economy, and that's an ongoing, deliverable. This program was much more than creating new aerospace and defense manufacturing facilities. It's all about building a nation's human capabilities. You can ask Carrie Victor and Tariq Farwana for details, but for me, it does not get better than delivering education and accomplishment that will in turn deliver benefits to the Saudi economy for generations to come. And on the issue of coupling education as a wonderful deliverable under offsets, one of the most inspiring speakers we had at several of our GOKA meetings was Dr. Banu Anaral from Drexel University. Two of Banu's many important messages were: bring universities that have developed technologies and/or expertise into the offset partnership arena, and focus on building human capabilities into your partner countries, as that act will deliver substantive benefits for all parties for years to come. There are many universities that can be wonderful partners to share their extremely valuable knowledge and unutilized intellectual property, as well as their research and development that has not yet been commercialized. Think of the benefits of coupling those university treasures with an obligor's financial strength and marketing skills to successfully commercialize that industrial partnership into the, not the industrial partnership, that intellectual property into the countries that would welcome developing those technologies. And you can speak to Nafiz Karabudik from Lockheed as to how Nafiz has successfully teamed universities with Lockheed's various divisions with impressive results around the globe. Then you have to give credit where it's due. Grant Rogan's Blenheim Capital was certainly a visionary pioneer in his creative genius on many projects, including, in some cases, deploying multiple offset obligations.
Again, we cannot hear you, though. You're muted. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, so where did I leave off?
You were talking about Grant Rogan's Blenheim Capital.
Okay, so what I wanted to say about Grant, I'm sorry that the sound keeps going off. I don't know if it's the connection or you know, somebody's angry at me and they want to sabotage this, but I don't think so. What I wanted to say about Grant was he's a pioneer in his creative genius. He used multiple obligors. One example and one transaction that stands out was Grant's program saved the Jordanian national airline from bankruptcy and paved the way for the airline to survive and thrive. His partnership with Guy Verrocchier, who many of you may remember from Airbus and EADS, helped to make that miracle happen. And then Grant went on to also create Project Blue in the UAE, again coupling multiple obligors to finance successful projects. These were examples of using offset obligations as equity building blocks for creating funding vehicles that would not have happened otherwise. Kudos to you, Grant. BAE Systems has performed great partnerships globally, and one of my favorites, it happened a long time ago, but it was still a favorite of mine, was the revival of the South African Dunlop Tire Company in the early 2000s through financial and marketing support. This was an example of leveraging BAE's financial strength to create and secure 3% below market debt funding for a South African company that otherwise would have had to pay 15 to 18% for local debt funding, which would have been an unsustainable debt burden. Instead, because of BAE's role in this deal, the South African Dunlop Tire Company was revitalized and provided jobs for thousands of South African workers. Another great example is Turkey's SSM, now called SSB, their innovation in teaming with Sikorsky to transfer know-how of producing world-class rotorcraft. This was the inspiration and perspiration of Steve Estel from Sikorsky and Murat Bayer, who headed up the SSM, and Bilal Akhtas, also from SSM, and dozens more on each side. And since that deal and others like it, look at how Turkey has emerged as a recognized and respected world-class aerospace and defense manufacturer and exporter throughout the world. One observation that I found particularly impressive during my recent visits with you, Shafqat, in Turkey, was the Turkish government's tremendous success in nurturing, supporting, and encouraging local research and development in so many technology industries. Another shining example for me is Ziva Eger, who ran the Israeli Industrial Cooperation Authority, who had the genius to couple the ICA with the Invest Israel program. This was the first time that we had seen a government ministry responsible for offset see the importance of coupling regional and federal economic development support with offset programs. It was under Ziva's leadership that the ICA focused on creating profitable opportunities for obligors to make more money in her country. The program was obviously successful because I believe that Israel has more banked and excess credits than any other market. Again, they have more banked and excess credits than any other market. In other words, the Israeli model attracted obligors to willingly invest in commercially successful partnerships in Israel. So we give credit and send love to Ziva. As many of you may know, Ziva had a cerebral hemorrhage several years ago. It's already been. She's still in a nursing home, and we're praying for her full recovery. So another example, and he would never understand why I was mentioning him, but it's Mitch Buda from Northrop Grumman, because this is the first time I saw a senior director from a large aerospace and defense company roll up his sleeves and literally woo, coax, and sometimes gently persuade his global supply chain colleagues and his various division colleagues to take a serious and professional look at the products that his company had promised to market, both internally within Northrop as well as outside of the host country. And for those of you who have tried this exercise of trying to get your own global supply chain behind you, you can appreciate that Mitch is an exception to the rule. He's had some success. Another example is obviously Malaysia's Technology Depository Agency that has successfully used offsets as the vehicle to bring numerous technologies that resulted in profitable local businesses in many sectors, including rail and computer manufacturing. Speak to Sharul Jambari for particulars, and for a basket of Malaysian success stories in the offset arena, speak to Kogi Balakrishnan. Kogi is a rock star in this area, and you know, we can help you connect with her if you need to figure out how to connect. She's great. Lockheed's programs in Korea, Poland, UAE, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that brought world-class aerospace and defense manufacturing, technology partnerships, and expertise in each market. They stand as an example of success. For details, you speak to Stan Ramirez, the driving force behind many of these achievements, and one of our industry's most accomplished and understated rock stars, in my opinion. One great Lockheed story is in the early 90s, Lockheed sold Korea the T-50 trainer. And I happened to work with the Lockheed team on the offset fulfillment. 25 years later, I'm in Lima, Peru, delivering a tag team presentation to the Peruvian Ministry of Defense with Enrique Navarro. And seated on the same stage as us was a representative from Korean Aerospace Industries marketing the KAI FA-50. That's the trainer, the Korean trainer that they got from Lockheed, with an offset plan for Peru. So the trainer aircraft that Lockheed delivered to Korea in the 90s with the comprehensive offset program was now being sold to Peru by the Koreans 20 years later. That's a success story. Since the early 80s, Boeing's been a recognized leader pursuing and implementing successful global partnerships in the countries where they build their businesses. I mention them because I've seen firsthand their commitment to investments in local industries and true partnerships in so many countries. One thing that stands out in my mind was I did a lot of work with Boeing in the late 80s and early 90s. That's when I started with Boeing. And I remember their early days in India, where Boeing was setting up various manufacturing operations with what were then small shops that then grew into world-class suppliers. Another great example of an offset success to me was Jim Corcoran, when he made his presentation on how Sikorsky funded a medical facility in Colombia to provide prosthetics to people who had suffered loss of limbs. By the time Jim finished that presentation, most of us in the room were moved and proud of this truly remarkable project. It wasn't about bending metal. It wasn't about making money. It was about delivering human capabilities and substantive benefits, social benefits to Colombia. It was remarkable. Another great example for me was Mike Rothermel's presentation, where he explained how when Cisco entered a new international market, Cisco would provide computer programming technology training and certification for the local market they were entering. He then explained that 99% of the people Cisco trained would be placed in jobs upon completion of the training program course. Under this program, Cisco was creating 1 million jobs each year in their global operations. 1 million people a year. That was a wow moment. That's an industrial partnership success story to me. Saab has always been on the forefront of finding ways to couple Swedish technology and Swedish finance to support development of profitable local industry in the countries where they pursue business. But Saab's model has often been delivering turnkey manufacturing capabilities into their partner countries and creating commercially viable and sustainable joint ventures. Part of Saab's secret has been that Swedish industry, unlike most other countries' industries, often band together as a united team to help one another in the markets where they partner. And the successes, the proof of the success is just look at their success in Brazil and India, the UAE and South Africa. Team Sweden's a powerful force to be reckoned with and earns a lot of respect. And then I couldn't wrap it up without talking about one of the most accomplished and creative leaders in our industry, is the Renaissance man Enrique Navarro from Madrid. Enrique is a rare example of having been a leader in Spain's SDEFA, and then shifting to private sector as first financier and respected deal maker. I've seen how Enrique couples an understanding of what a nation needs, what that specific country's capabilities are, how financing can best be arranged, what partnerships can be forged in that region, and how marketing can best be pursued. And as a result of his approach and his incredible relationships, and most importantly, respect with both government and industry leaders, Enrique has created mutually rewarding partnerships in the aerospace and defense arena in Europe, in South America, in Africa, and Asia. I don't know if he's going to, to other continents beyond that, but that's pretty impressive by itself. So that's some success stories for you.
That's amazing, actually. You have given us an introductory roadmap for the offset czar. But what's your advice for the industry offset managers who have to navigate the process?
Well, look, you have to recognize that different companies have entirely different approaches to how they pursue their offset programs. If we were to go back in time to the 1980s, many aerospace and defense companies looked at offset programs as a necessary evil, a task that needed to get done as cheaply as possible, minimizing risks and liabilities. In the 1980s, many companies didn't see offsets as a marketing differentiator to win them new business, but rather as a financing vehicle to deliver the client country other badly needed capabilities or infrastructure development. Hotels were built, nursing schools were established, fish farms were created, all its fulfillment of offset obligations, and all funded by obligors. Some companies are clearly proactive and genuinely want to pursue mutually beneficial partnerships in the countries where they do business. In some cases, companies adopt this true partnership approach out of necessity because they constantly need to win new foreign supply contracts to sustain their operations. In other words, many aerospace and defense companies may not have the lion's share of their business coming from their own country or government. And because these companies rely upon international business to survive, they welcome and embrace opportunities for true partnerships in the countries where they're pursuing sales. And as a result, many of these companies are often very successful in the industrial partnership programs they pursue, as well as ensuring that their company will survive and flourish. There are, of course, other companies that still have a culture that look at offsets as unnecessary and undesirable. And those companies will try to do the minimum possible at the cheapest price with the minimum liability and or no risk. In the long term, this approach where offsets are seen only as an obligation and not as an opportunity may not in the long term yield results that deliver sustainable economic and social benefits. What a shock. In 1998, 25 years ago, I helped to organize and host the first World Countertrade Conference in Coral Gables, Florida. Many of you on this call may have been at that meeting, or maybe a few of you at least. At that time, we were the ACA, the American Countertrade Association, which later changed its name to GOCA, inviting members from all over the world. One of our keynote speakers was Dr. Christoph Kamm, who ran one of ABB's structured finance groups, specialized in countertrade and offsets. In the 80s and 90s, I was also a member not only of ACA, which became GOCA, but also of APCA, the Asia Pacific Countertrade Association, for which Christoph Kamm had been the chairman. Christoph was retiring after 35 plus years in international trade and finance. And at that gathering, I asked Christoph to share his thoughts and recommendations to future leaders in the offset field. I used to call Christoph's speech that was delivered at that gathering the Sermon from the Mount, as Christoph was trying to give all of us, obligors, government offset authorities, third-party expert advisors, he was trying to give us a gift by sharing some of the lessons learned from his decades of experience. As my wife and close friends can attest, I have a hard time throwing things out. So I, of course, kept a copy of Christoph's speech, which I can share upon request. Note, ABB, that was the company that Christoph was heading up, was both an obligor as well as a solution provider, teaming partner for other companies' obligations. There's not enough time to recite each chapter of his speech, but I'll share a few of the many pieces of advice for the industrial groups, for the obligors. His advice was, attribute equal importance to the offset agreement as to the main contract. Apply the same devotion to the quality of your offset fulfillment as to the quality of the subject of your supply agreement. Do create real value or add value by delivering real substantive growth to the local company's exports. Be creative in launching non-traditional offset products and services in line with the host country's interests. No window dressing, no make-believe or wrapping of cheap solutions, as one day that path will come back to hurt your credibility. Assure that all information provided is true, correct, and complete, and no fake transactions. Build the cost for all offset-related activity into your price and provide the necessary funds and personnel for proper execution of the offset program. Don't search for the cheap ways out. Do take the offset obligation seriously and show your company's willingness to succeed. Don't try to bypass or evade promises given during the campaign or fulfillment phase. And don't delay your fulfillment hoping because of cost-saving motives. Organize yourself for efficient offset program development, execution, and monitoring. And cooperate closely with the local beneficiary partner, as offset is a joint undertaking which has to be truly appreciated both by the local partner and released by that local partner in the end. Because if you tick that local partner off, you're not going to get your approval. And always continue to explore alternative possibilities for new offset programs. I also found it interesting that Dr. Kam advised the government offset authorities to allow execution of offset programs by third parties, as results matter more than identity of the actor. Ain't that the truth? Okay, I know it's a little self-serving to say that, but the truth is, it's the truth. Okay, over the decades, we've seen all sorts of interesting and bizarre developments in the offset arena. And I thought I'd name a couple of them. One country's offset authority refused to process offset submissions requesting release of credits because there was a liquidity crisis in that country, and the offset authority was cashing the performance bonds from the obligors to pay their salaries and fund their pensions. More than a few countries' offset authorities have told their obligors to abandon their offset fulfillment program, which they may have carefully developed over several years, and instead simply fund the Ministry of Defense's purchase of some product or service that they didn't have the cash to pay for. One offset obligor was publicly dragging about how she had tricked the offset authority into granting her company credits. Maybe she doesn't realize what functions audits perform. Sometimes those audits occur years later. Bluff fulfillment will eventually be discovered and cause reputational damage. We've seen examples where 10 years had passed before the fluff was discovered, and the problem that arose were not limited to financial penalties. Over the years, we've also seen more than a few examples where companies have not delivered what they had originally promised. And although those companies may have saved some money in the short term, in the long term, nations remember who the good guys are and who are not such good guys. So my point is that eventually everything you do or don't do is remembered, and the countries have long memories. About 15 or 20 years ago, an offset manager made a deal with his client government customer and promised various maintenance, repair, and overhaul support and certification support of the products that had been sold. The deal and the promises made were clear, and all parties shook hands. And the offset manager came back home and handed the paperwork to his company's lawyers. The company lawyers crafted a long memorandum of agreement document that, if you read it very carefully, was not binding and made sure that the company was not committed or liable for anything. The document was then sent back to the partner country, and the offset ministry did not carefully read the document, and they signed it. 2 years later, the offset manager that had done the original deal had retired or moved on, and the Ministry of Defense in the country asked, where are the deliverables? And he banged his fist on the table. What's going on? You didn't give me what you promised. The response from the obligor's new management team was, what deliverables? This memorandum of agreement was best efforts. The company lawyers must have been very proud of themselves, but I can tell you that 15 plus years later, that country's still not forgotten that experience, nor the company that delivered this to them. And that anger remains not only for the company, but for the company's affiliates as well, which had nothing to do with the matter. So closing thoughts are, obligors have to commit to delivering substantive and sustainable benefits to the countries where they have obligations. Obligors have to be empowered internally and provided with support from other divisions within their own companies, so that the hardest part of getting an offset deal is no longer the internal battles within that company. Look, also my apologies to the literally dozens of colleagues and friends who, because of a lack of time, I was not able to also mention and give kudos to. I hope some of this info has been helpful to you and shed some productive light. And I apologize if I spoke too quickly. I think Shafqat has recorded this if you want to torture yourself and listen to it again. And as I said, if you want to get a copy of the of the Sermon from the Mount by Christoph Kamm. I can get it. I was laughing because as I was going through my files today, I found this one. This was 1984 in Saudi, the Lytton Peace Shield Investment and Offset Program. Some of you may remember, it's a long time ago that we've been doing this.
No,
So
that was
anyway,
amazing.
Shafqat, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, though. That was amazing and insightful chat, actually. But we have one question that is, I think that you will answer. In the case that a government-industrial partnership rules have been successful but resulted in no further capacity for companies to discharge their offset commitments, what can obligor companies do about it?
Wait, is it in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the
Case that a government's IP rules have been successful, but resulted in no further capacity for companies. Well, it depends on the country. It depends on, it's a great question. And the reality is it all depends on the relationships that you have in the country, because what you want to do is you want to be able to have an audience with the offset leaders in the country, where you go to them and you explain to them, listen, we need to have a win-win here. If you don't allow us to do something, you've got to open the door for us to make deliverables available to you. And if you don't allow us to, we all lose from that. And nobody wants to lose. So you have to find a senior level at that government authority to plead the case, because very often the lower level people don't have the authority, or they're afraid, because all they're doing is they're checking a box. And that's why I remember before when I talked about the difference between guidelines or policy and law. You want to try to make sure you're always dealing with something that has some flexibility. So I hope that answers it. But the sum is try to speak to somebody senior within that group, and within the offset authority, to get an audience to allow for alternative plans.
We have another question, which is a very long, and we are out of time, actually. So I would like to thank you, though, for your insightful chat, and that was amazing as always. And thank you for our audience for their participation. And I hope we see each other in the next events that we will collaborate again.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
By the way, I want to say one thing before we sign off, is that Shafqat, I want to thank you for putting on these talks. I want to thank you for the professionalism that you have, and for the amount of boundless energy that you have for pursuing things for our industry and for your clients.
Thank you very
you're
much.
a rock star as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.